Just for a few housekeeping rules. If you have any questions, as I mentioned, just feel free to write them into the chat pod. We also will be using today some polling questions. You can use the chat box. We won't be using Q&A today, but feel free to raise your hand if you also have any questions. As I mentioned, you are in muted mode, but if you need to speak or as you raise your hand and are called upon, if you hit *6 on your phone, it will unmute you. We ask that if you do need to take another call that might end up providing us with the whole music during the presentation, we ask that you hang up the call if possible before doing so, hanging up this call before doing so. We appreciate your efforts in helping us to keep the presenter clear of any background information and noises. So this is just a schematic showing you that if you are having any audio problems right now, feel free to check that into the chat pod, but also making sure that if you called in through the phone, that you mute your computer screen. And that's done so as you look in the left schematic. You just want to make sure that that green volume button is actually off, so it would be red, or excuse me, it would be white actually. So that you don't have both your computer speakers on as well as your phone audio on as well. And definitely feel free to use either source of audio, just making sure to turn one off at a time. Okay, so as the National Council of Urban and Health, we are a national nonprofit organization devoted to the support and development of quality, accessible, and culturally competent healthcare services for American Indians and Alaska Natives living in urban settings. We do this by providing trainings and webinars and community of learning such as this in order to provide our urban Indian organizations as well as those that are stakeholders and are assisting American Indians and Alaska Natives in urban settings through these opportunities. So this community of learning, which is the Behavioral Health Grant Writing Community of Learning, was actually put in place in order to make sure that our UIOs have the tools necessary to be successful when writing grants or for prospecting with private funders for additional funds to support their patients that they serve. And we've had a really great turnout in the last 2 sessions. This is actually the last session, the 3rd session of this series, and so we're happy that you could join us today. With that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, actually. His name is Cervantes, and he has served in the nonprofit sector for since 2001, working with urban charter schools, mental health, veterans, education, homeless, skilled nursing facilities, clinics, health service providers, and religious institutions. Louise is the founder of OnPoint Fiscal Solutions, providing CFO services and accounting services to urbans and nonprofits. While partnering with the United American Indian Involvement, which is actually a UIO in LA, he helped stabilize and strengthen their financial position along with instilling a culture of philanthropy. The agency grew from $6 million to $10 million annual budget within the 3 years. They became the recipient of a Department of Labor workforce grant aiding the Native community's upward economic mobility. Also through his leadership, they became a fiscal sponsor for the city of Los Angeles in creating the first Indigenous Peoples Day event partnering with tribes, urbans, and corporations nationally. One of his personal highlights of the event was meeting with LA Lakers legend AC Green, who was present to support as he is Choctaw. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Cervantes, and I'm sure if there's more information he would like to provide, he would be able to do so. So Luis, are you on the line?
I am. Thank you, Kimberly. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and again, sorry for the technicality issues there. I know some folks are still joining on, so I'll try to talk slowly for this first slide. But as Kimberly presented me just I'm going to do a couple of slides that do relate to my experience, and hopefully it will help in getting into the financials, because to me they really are the same thing, especially when you're in the nonprofit sector. So again, I've been with nonprofits for a fairly long time, work with many agencies, but how this came about for me and why I started the CFO consultancy, it really started with an agency I was working with. It had been a recipient of an Obama signature grant, which was a Promised Neighborhood. Part of that grant was, the goal was to work and partner with 60 other agencies within our area. And in doing that, what my staff and I found as we created benchmarks and reviews with these various agencies, that regardless of whether they were smaller or even larger agencies, there was a lack of, sometimes I would call it accountability when it came to their financials and understanding and having updated policies. And so we found ourselves training these agencies. We let them use some of our information and adopt it if they wanted to. But that was really the beginning for me. When I started, I noted there was a need with them. As part of OnPoint Financial, or OPFS, really the goal is financial partner oversight, to work with CEOs, boards, or a management team, and typically working with an existing accounting department or development department, and working again with the CEO. Most recently, I had the opportunity to work with an urban agency. I was flown out to their location, and the first thing, when you jump around from one urban agency to another, it's really neat because the culture aspect of things is present, and it's amazing. But just within 15 minutes of sitting down with the accounting personnel and with the CEO, I was pretty much able to assess where some needs were pretty clear. And I was able to then work with their board on the same day, get an assessment, and just provide some guidance and areas that they could always become better in. So again, this is a little bit of my background. Those titles you see there are many of the titles I've held in the nonprofit sector as an employee of agencies, and you have my contact information as well. So I'm going to keep going here. Oh, actually, before I continue. So that same agency, by the way, that got the Promised Neighborhood Grant, we were located in 125 locations at 1,200 employees, 300 full-time, 900 part-time. And I had to approve 200 budgets annually. And I mean budgets that you actually have to report on every month with the funders. And it was federal, state, county, city, philanthropy. So there was a lot of budget reviews and actuals and so forth, and having to develop an infrastructure and build it was not easy. But I had a great team in order to be able to do that. So again, thank you for allowing me to speak today. We're going to keep going. So you're going to see there's going to be some polls to your right that you'll have an opportunity to, just provide us a little bit of information about you. It is anonymous, so you're not, no one's going to know it's you. And if they do, you could just blame the cookie. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm showing you this slide. This is the nonprofit life cycle. Where do you believe your agency is in right now? For some of you, you might have just started your nonprofit, or you guys are growing in growth mode. It's really important that you understand where you stand as an agency, because where you believe you stand is where pretty much everyone else is going to believe you stand. And a big part of that, you see it in your board agendas, you see it in your executive agendas, you see it in your management agendas, you see it in how you run programs, you see it when you're with a community, and it's really important that you understand this, and wherever you believe you are in is probably where people believe you're in as well. But one of the biggest areas is financials, right? I mean, that is one of the areas, and obviously there's more important things than just financials, there's outcomes and so many other things, and the actual impact in the community, but it's important that you understand where you're at. And everyone thinks they're in growth mode, but I can tell you that if you've been around the block, you can bring somebody around and they'll tell you if they're in growth mode or not, and kind of give you a reality check. But I'm showing you this because it's important for you to just know where you're at. And so that's it. And again, there's some polls on the right, and it looks like everyone's in growth mode or being renewal, or you're in renewal mode. And that's actually really neat to see that when you realize that there's opportunities. Sometimes it even means changing aspects of the mission or the services that you're going to provide. And that may have come due to leadership changes or board changes, and I've been a part of those as well. So thank you for responding to that poll. We are going to continue. Some of the polls will stay to your right so that you can, see where things are at. And again, thank you for participating in this, and I think people are joining on. Okay, we'll continue. So these are the three areas that we're going to be looking at today. As I put together these slides and I went back to these 3 points, I was thinking, I hope that what I put together actually coordinates well with these points. So, I'll do my best, but these are important areas to cover. Developing financial reports for multiple stakeholders. That's a challenge, right? Sometimes we're limited by the systems we have. Sometimes we're limited for many other reasons, but it's important to understand that there are multiple stakeholders. And number 2, capturing time between programs. We'll be looking at that, talking about that a bit. And then lastly, if you're in charge of the finances at your agency, you think about the number 3 all the time. You probably sleep thinking about it. Okay, so a little bit more about me beyond my experience. I am from Los Angeles, born and raised. Over here to the right, you see these young ladies. That's where my world pretty much revolves around them right now, right? I have my 13-year-old ballerina there, and then I have my high school daughter who's part of a competitive dance team over here, Granada Hills Charter School, and my wife, and that's pretty much our weekend. Ballet competitions, dance, and it's fun. I love it. Also on the bottom right, I went to Cal State Northridge, so we attend the basketball game. Typically, the ballerina is the one that goes with me. It just so happens to be that my entire family joined me that day. I've been a season ticket holder for years, but none of them show up except for the ballerina. So anyway, here's a picture. Over to the left, you'll note there's a picture with a bunch of kids with red shirts. So during this last summer, my daughter had the opportunity to go to Anchorage, Alaska, and work with an agency called Hope Worldwide. Amazing national agency, actually global. But she got to go to a camp to work with kids and some with certain disabilities and challenges. And it was pretty amazing because the teenager that returned after the 2 weeks was not the same one that we sent. The experience she had out there, the relationships she got to build, a lot of kids nationally went to this program. And then the picture right below it you'll see my daughter's wearing the sweats, gray sweats. It just so happened that about 8 girls came from the LA area, which she didn't know of before, and they're best friends now. They see each other all the time. And then further to the left, on the very top, if you have a Department of Labor grant or a workforce contract, the native programs, there is Mr. Dwayne Hall. Great man, great individual. And we just happened to take a picture there. I think we were in Oklahoma for a conference. And then to the right is Jeremy Billy, the former CEO of the United American Indian Involvement. He was commuting about 80 miles each way for 17 years. And I think I talked him out of doing that. As much as he and I have become incredible friends, he actually got an opportunity to work with 5 tribes nearest to his home. So his commute went from 3 hours each way to 15 minutes. So I was actually very happy for him. And then right below that picture is the United American Indian Involvement Group with some of the IHS folks from the local office. And, I don't want to go over the other pictures on the bottom, but, I'm sure, you guys may be around nationally, but it's, I'm a big Lakers fan and a big Dodgers fan, and I don't want to get into that. I get too emotional thinking about my baseball team and how we got cheated out of 2 World Series, but that's a story for another time. So we'll go ahead and continue. So I serve on a board, a mental health service provider, and I was the president for about 4 years. So here they gave me a plaque recently. I asked not to be a board president anymore, but just wanted to serve as a board, just as a regular board member. But I bring this up because I have experience beyond just the financial component, but there's also just as a board chair, as a board president. And this agency, El Centro de Amistad, when I joined, had about a $2.8 million budget, 40-year history. They were very happy to be there. But, once I became the president, it was very important for me that we could diversify our funding. And one of the parts for me as a board chair was to reinvigorate the board and its involvement. And we were able to do that. The agency is now at a $7.5 million budget 4 years later. And the executive director, Tamika Farther, is amazing. Once we set up those goals and strategy, she was all over it. There's not one thing that we put out as a goal that she has not accomplished. So we really make a good team. So I wanted to just give you an idea of kind of my background as we continue on with this. Okay, so challenges with managing finances. I was at a conference in New Mexico, and there were several agencies there that also have the Department of Labor contracts, urban and others, and it was through that someone said something very profound to me. There was a lady there, just happened to sit in the same table, and she told me, I feel like we're the stepchild of our area. No one provides us services. No one helps us. And I'm just kind of listening to her, and then I continued and asked her more questions, and I realized through that conversation, wow, I can really help you. You don't even need that much of my time. You're already on the right track. I just need to provide you maybe some input. And that's what then led me to start focusing on urban. And it's not just the financial, it's the culture, as you already know. It's being able to understand the demographic base. And it is special. Working in, if you've been in the nonprofit sector, you understand there are many missions that are really amazing, but there are some that really just hit your heart. And for me, it truly was working with urbans. I felt a responsibility to the agencies I've been able to work with, and to be able to train. And you know how it is. You have knowledge that you want to be able to pass on. But one of the biggest areas is this. When you think about the challenges in managing finances, I want you, and there's a poll there, what do you consider your biggest need? And this is actually poll 6, which will pop up in a bit. What do you consider your biggest need? These are the areas that I jotted down in my experience in dealing with nonprofits, dealing with urbans, and it's, sorry, it's not poll 6. It's the one that says, what do you consider your biggest need? There you go. Here it is. If you don't mind and maybe share, what do you consider your biggest need right now in your agency? It may be cash flow. It may be financial reporting. It could just be culture. And when I say culture, I'm speaking about a forward-thinking type culture. Maybe you desire that and you don't have it. Maybe it's your accounting personnel. You kind of wonder, what are they doing? They just have an office stacked up with papers, messy. You're not even certain if what the information that's in the system is actually correct. Or perhaps it's just you do have the right people, you just don't have the fiscal leadership. What do you feel are some of your biggest needs right now? Again, thank you for sharing that, and there are some results there that you can look at. Okay. Great. We're going to move on. And actually, just stay on this topic. So one of the things that I really enjoy doing is assessment, is being able to go to a nonprofit, talk to them, talk to the board, talk to the staff. And, you know, my mindset is never about a gotcha type mindset. Most of the time when I enter a room, people think that's what my job is there. And very quickly, I dissipate that and say, no, this is more about being a partner and working together. And I wanted to let you know that that's very important, especially when you're a financial leader. It's very important that we are able to see ourselves as partners with programs, with development, with the executive team, with the board, that it's about communication, it's about working together, and that's critical. That's very critical for me, especially as a financial leader. So I thank you for, again, sharing your thoughts here with the poll. We're going to move on. And who are our stakeholders? We have many. We have our funders, right? We have to be able to report to them. There's the board of directors. And the board can be made up of many different types of directors. Depending on your agency, as you are growing, sometimes you get attention, right? And at times you might get thanks and maybe some high net worth individuals that want to give to your agency, and at times they want to join your board. And that changes the dynamic of the board. But you have a board of directors that is a stakeholder. You have committees. Some agencies have some very involved finance committees, development committees, compliance committees, and I've dealt with some finance committees that are just like that. You know, those individuals at the board meetings that ask a lot of questions on the finances, more than you'd like to actually hear at a board meeting, those need to be your finance committee people. And yeah, I have experience with that, and I actually enjoy it, right? Especially as a financial person, it's fun to be able to talk about finances and have people ask you questions. You also have philanthropy. Those are also your stakeholders. And you have to be able to report to them. They want to make sure that you're able to handle their funds. You have directors and managers as internal stakeholders. I've always viewed them as very critical because they are actually the ones that ultimately are driving the budget. Then you have your executive team and you have the community as well. And what are folks looking for? It's really your ability to manage their funds and achieve the outcomes. We know this, but I just thought I'd incorporate that. All right, let's get to the fun stuff here. So we're going to look at some financials. I mean, it was really hard for me to select just one, but I selected a couple versions of the financials, and it's mainly to explain what's important about them. And hopefully this is something that's present in your agency. So we'll continue here. All right, you guys know what this is. Sometimes this confuses you, right? For example, if I ask you, what's the difference between a profit and loss statement, a statement of activities, or an income statement? Who can tell me what the difference is? Because you're in those meetings, right? And the board meetings the board members refer to these, and they use all of the names. And no, it's a trick question. None. It's the exact same thing. They're essentially the exact same thing. So I wanted to share that with you. But I'm looking at this, and I call this the big blue, because there's some important components here that I wanted to be able to review with you that are important, that are adopted in your agency, especially as you know how it is. You want to know the position of your agency. You want to know where your programs are. And the most important area is being able to get these frequently. When I mean frequently, I mean at least monthly, and that there is some type of review or analysis on what this is. And I'll explain this one very shortly. It pretty much encompasses everything I ever really need to see, at least as the first tier. You have on the left side, you've got the budget. It's always important to have a budget on the, I'll call it the P&L, the profit and loss. It's important to have a budget because you have to share that budget with the board. The board wants to know where things are at. All those stakeholders I mentioned want to know what your budget is, what are your, which is essentially your expectations at the end of the year, right? That's what you're expecting. Then we have the monthly, and then we have a year-to-date. In this agency, as you can see, they're doing very well. Here's their budget for the month, and then you have the actuals for the month. And for me, when I'm meeting with programs, I do these on a macro level with an executive person or a board member or a development, and we'll look at this. And we'll review it. We'll talk about why the government contracts came in the way they came in. In this case, they came in a little higher. It's important to understand the whys. And obviously, for this agency this month, the foundation money really came in according to the expectations. So it's really exciting to be able to talk about why these achievements occurred. And so you cannot do that without having these documents. It's very critical that you have them. And then also being able to review the expenses as well, which is here. You want to be able to talk about why salaries came in under budget, or their positions that weren't there. When I meet with programs, we actually review this exact same model, but it's specific to their own program. And I set up time every month, whether it's done remotely through a webinar platform just like the one we're doing here, or we do it in person, and we'll review these things. And then we'll dive deeper into these salaries and so forth. And when I'm in those conversations, I'm taking a lot of notes. So typically the program people are the ones telling me, oh yeah, the reason we're under budget is because we lost somebody, and this is the turnover that we had. And those are notes for me to be able to share with the board later. So it's really important to have consistency when you're reviewing these the P&L. Again, I use this to review with the CEO, development, the board, and important to see these on a monthly basis. It's important to review these with programs and to take notes, especially of needs, right? Usually in these budget meetings, when you'll hear from the program person, oh, we're really struggling in a certain area. Our program funding does not allow us to get food. And if we can have food, it would really help our census. Oh, okay, I'll write that down. That's something for development now. And development's always wanting to know what the needs are. So I'm writing these things down. Very important that these things be present. There's also on the bottom, you'll notice some tabs on the Excel. You know, I also like to make sure that there's census information, a nice little summary, right? Some folks don't actually want to see all this information up here. They want to see a summary. Some of you guys want to see a whole lot more than what I'm presenting here. And that's for a detailed general ledger, which I don't have on, you can't see the tab here, but that's usually something I'll provide as well. You know, there are folks that really want to dig in, evaluate, look, others really don't care to see it except the bottom line number. And that's what I mean by being able to create reports for different stakeholders. Sometimes we're limited due to our accounting system, or sometimes it's just not knowing. It's just not knowing that this is something you can generate, and that's something that people are actually interested in reviewing. So again, it should be part of your agency. Look at these monthly, and it's not just generating them, but actually looking at them, analyzing them, and having conversation about them. That's also important when you're talking to funders and government agencies during audit compliance, right? They ask those questions, and you can truthfully say, yes, we look at these every month. And there you go. You get to check that mark, and you're good to go. So this is a profit and loss where we look at the monthly, we look at the year to date. For this particular agency, they were in their first month. For the year, they have a really odd fiscal period, but there it is. Obviously doing very good. They actually budgeted for a $30,000 deficit for the year, for the month, and they actually ended up on a surplus. So just want you to know, if you don't have this, very important that you make this happen. Challenge your accounting staff, your CFO, your controller, that you want to see this by a certain time in the month. And usually it should not be before the 10th, okay? If you think you're going to get this by the 3rd or the 5th of the month, I'm going to tell you now, you're crazy, and you do not understand how these things get put together. So it's going to have to be sometime after the 10th, because, you know, you got to close and so forth. But this is a profit and loss. My favorite of these is the by fund. I love this template here. It's basically a profit and loss, but I get to see all the programs or funds side by side. You get to see them all the way across. This was a really important statement for me to review, especially when I was looking at 200 budgets. It wasn't just me looking at them. I had grant accountants and so forth. But I love seeing this, because when I get to a board meeting and if we're like, we have a surplus or we have a deficit for the month, I can easily identify why and what's the reason. And it gives me some opportunity to look into it a little bit further. Sometimes it's just a timing thing, or sometimes it's simply we're just over budget. And that's important to have. So this is my absolute favorite. This also helps others understand the extent and the complexity of the finances that you guys are dealing with. When they see something like this, they see that it isn't just one agency. It's like you're dealing with multiple funds, and it's complex. That's why I really like showing this. And they appreciate it. Like, okay, wow, you really are monitoring quite a bit here. If you have a single source fund and it's working out, that's really good for you, right? It's a little easier to monitor that. But once you're dealing with multiple funds, you're also going to start dealing with more complications. which we're going to discuss a little bit later on. Again, this one is my absolute favorite, the buy funds. Now we'll transition to the next statement, and this one also has multiple names, the statement of financial position or the balance sheet. This one is not like the P&L. And it's important that you understand this, because when you're going to a lender, or when you're going to your board, or you're going to any funder for that matter, it's important that you understand what this information is about. The balance sheet, pretty much the way I'd like to describe it, it's almost like describing when you go to a financial advisor and they do an assessment on you, they want to know what your net worth is, right? This is pretty much what that is for your agency. You get to see the cash. It tells you if you have investments. It tells you what money you're expecting, right? Accounts receivable. Here's where it'll show if you have property, you have buildings, you have cars. You have it here. Quick thing here for some of you guys, when you have a building, the value of that building when you purchased it or you acquired it is what is in here. So you don't actually see the current value, right? As you know, because facilities, buildings typically appreciate. What I like to do, especially in the audit, I like to ask a broker to be able to provide me an assessment of value, market value of my building, so that we can incorporate that in an audit, just like a notation. Because here it might say 22 million, but the value of your facilities might actually be 60 million at this point. And so I like to include that in an audit, and that's important, especially when you're looking for lending and other things. You know, they want to see collateral, and this strengthens the position to an extent, but you cannot change you can't change it to the current value. So it'll reflect the value from when you had purchased it. But that's what you're going to see is the assets on the balance sheet, right? That's the very top. You're going to see what is your agency's net worth. Pretty much this is it right here. If you have investments and you're lucky to have that, they're going to be here as well. So this is the balance sheet. And then we'll move on. This is the other portion of the balance sheet. And again, why are we reviewing this? The P&L, or the statement of financial position, these are the ones that any lender, any bank, any funder, they will always request to see these. There's a statement of cash flows, but most folks, you know, they don't always look at that one as much. They just kind of rely on your audit at the end of the year to see it from the auditors. But these are the two that they're always going to look at. Part of their balance sheet, besides the assets, is then your liabilities. And here is where you're going to show what do you owe at that point in time at the end of that month, right? Your accounts payables, that's reflected here. Current liabilities, that's anything that would be paid, needs to be paid out within the year. You're going to have it right here. Your credit cards, your payroll, whatever's been accrued up to that point. Any vacation, if you had to pay it all out, it's reflected here. And then you have other liabilities here as well, which are your loans, mortgages, things like that. These are typically more long-term. So you'll also see it here. So I wanted you to take a peek at this, and just hopefully you're writing some notes, because I can tell you this, there are agencies I've worked with that have $3 million in annual revenue that have a lot healthier statement of financial position than agencies I've worked with that have $100 million annual revenue. Remember, they're two different things. So when funders, banks, lenders, community are assessing you, and they're looking at a P&L, but they're looking also at the statement of financial position, they're trying to get a better picture of where your agency is at. I'm not sure the background of everyone that's on this meeting. I should have had that as a poll question, but I'm going to show you a quick trick. Something that you can take to your next meeting and you're going to wow whoever you're in front of. In fact, they might even catapult you to CFO just for bringing this up. Of course, I'm joking. Some easy financial ratios. Easy financial ratios. Normally, some of you guys see this through your county funders. They might actually provide this for you when you give them the audit. I like to run these, and sometimes it's very easy to have these for the board, especially on a monthly, especially those members that, maybe they're not as financially inclined. And so I like to look at the expense to income ratio. That's a very easy one. All you're doing is what's the revenue of expense. If this number is below 1, it's not good. If it's above, if it's below 1 is good. If it's above a 1, it's not that good. But obviously you can always see that because there'll be a negative as a net. But the other ratio I wanted to show you is the current ratio and the quick ratio. They're very much the same, not fully. One of them includes inventory, the other one doesn't. But what this is saying here is, what is your financial solvency? Banks rate you on this. So anything above a 1 is considered good. For this agency, they're below that. And those are numbers you can easily do. All you do is take your current assets divided by liabilities, and that'll tell you what this number is. Obviously, this is very healthy. They're way up there. This agency, just so you know, the CEO has done a great job. When he took it over, they had nothing in investments, and he's grown it quite a bit. And then we have the cash. I mean, it's pretty remarkable job what this person has done. They deal with the homeless population. But, he's been very focused every month. He's looking at these reports. And they're bidding on new contracts, new opportunities, and he's a very driven person. And obviously that's also, it comes with the outcomes, right, with the impact and how many people we're actually helping. So again, these are some information that you can review, very easy ratios to pull off. And again, when you're going to go to a funder, especially if you're in development, you want to know these things before you even go to a meeting and submit a proposal, because they're evaluating you based on all this information. They want to know, can you handle the funds we're going to give you? And you would know that in advance. Sometimes it's better to wait till you strengthen your financial position before you do some of those asks, because if not, you're going to have a lot of meetings to try to explain your situation. And that happened. That happened with some of the agencies I've been with. I've been with agencies that had about $5,000 of fundraising every year, and has grown to $500,000 in a couple of years. Part of that was positioning themselves for the ask. All right. We will move on, and I'm sorry if I'm going too fast here. You can always use the chat there. Cash flow. This one is always on my mind all the time. I created this cash flow model that I look at on a weekly basis. Pretty much as funds are coming into the bank account, it goes right into this document, and I look at the timing. But this also corresponds to the budget, and they're usually kind of attached on the same attachment. And I use it to monitor our funds, the money that comes in, the expenses that go out, and I do that on a weekly, but I'll consolidate this and create it as a monthly when I present it to banks, lenders. Sometimes they're asked for this. And you try to rush last second trying to create one, Why not just create something that you can use every day, but then you can also share it? And it's a real like live document. And I looked at this all the time. The CEOs that want to see this on a weekly basis, some never want to actually look at it. They're just entrusting you as a financial leader to manage it. So this is the cash flow model I like to personally use. You only see a portion of it with the revenues here, but this one particularly has multiple bank accounts. And I always put a lot of comments. Like I said, I'm looking at this thing every single day. As I meet with program and I know that they're going to have to buy $30,000 of computers in a month, I plug that in here in my forecast. There's this forecast here. And that's essentially what should be happening in your organization to have that type of financial health. So this is a cash flow model. We'll move on to the timesheets. I have to tell you, this is the one a lot of you guys get in trouble with. These are multiple agencies, but the most recent, this is one of the first things I noted, was the way they were taking time. When you deal with multiple funds and you have shared staff shared and resources, this is one of the areas that you get dinged on by your funders. When they say, can I see the timesheet for your staff for this program, and then they want to reconcile it with what was actually paid out. And this is very important because if this is not aligned, you can get in a lot of trouble with this one. You'll hear the term from funders, hey, this is not right. You're doing it as a budgeted format or a predetermined, is what they'll call it, which kind of upsets me when they use those terms. But one of the agencies I met with, the first thing I noted was that the payroll specialist was creating the Excel. And in the Excel, he was already saying, okay, 2% to this fund for this employee, 5% to this fund, right? And I asked, hey, have you guys ever gotten in trouble with this? Because that's not how it works. Oh, no, we've been doing this for years. It's fine. A month later, they got a huge report questioning all their costs, and they were being told they needed to return $2 million of payroll, anything that had to do with insurances, with rent allocations, all of that. And this was a tricky one to deal with because it was a little bit before my time, but they had actually, the auditors that came in for that particular fund, they had actually pulled some of the staff and asked them, hey, how do you do your time logs? Oh, yeah, we get it from the payroll specialist, and they place it, and we just find a way. And they're like, oh, really? Okay, can you just tell us more? So when I jumped on board, this had already happened. And how do you fight against that, right? Because really, when you have staff that is working on multiple projects, they're supposed to be recording, I worked 1 hour for project A, 1 hour for project B, and maybe that's all they did that day, but they have 2 other projects. Maybe on the next day they worked on all 4 projects, but that needs to be logged down. So it's very important that you have a system and that you do not go cheap on this, because agencies have gotten in trouble with this one, where your payroll or timesheet provider, if it's one of those online ones, where you don't have the ability to do that. It's very important that it just gets done online. Your employees can do it right off their phones. I do it that way myself. Throughout the day, I'm jotting my time. So it's really important that you correct this in your agency, because it's a really tough fight. So with this agency that was being asked to return a couple of $1 million, it took me about a year. But, at the end of the day, I told them, even though these employees, yes, they were given that time, it does not mean they did not work. on those programs that exact time. So that's the argument I came up with, and we fought for about a year. They gave up at the end, said, okay, let's just make sure the next year everything's corrected. And I'm like, absolutely, and we transitioned them. They had been using ADP. They just weren't using the modules that were available to them. And when we talked to ADP about getting the modules, they were going to charge you an arm and a leg. So what we did is, hey, we're going to be transitioning to someone else. We've already gotten 3 quotes. Immediately they transitioned us to their retention department and said, okay, we're going to give you all the bells and whistles, no extra cost. And so you have to be able to think like that and have that. But it's very critical that you have this in place. Typically, the way I do this, when I start a budget, for example, I will have all the staff on one side of an Excel, and then I'll kind of work my way down all the various funds that are going to cover that employee's salary. There's nothing wrong with this, because in the end, you always need a budget to start with. But what you cannot have is an employee end the year at these exact percentages. Like, it's almost impossible to do that. So you have to be able to review those profit and loss every month. And when you're reviewing that profit and loss and you realize, oh, our salaries are a little higher, well, that's when you investigate and you go, oh, that's because Johnny and Sally have had to put more time into this one program. That's why the salary is a little higher on that one, but you'll then note on this other one it's a little bit lower. And so then you can make those adjustments. Hey, Johnny and Sally, let's talk about that. Do we need to modify that budget? Or, oh, no, we're actually we see ourselves transitioning back to more time on this other program. See, that has to be present with your agency. And part of reviewing those financials it's part of being able to have a healthy functioning agency. If you guys are not reviewing those financials beyond just executive leadership, there's a problem, right? Your managers need the tools to understand where they stand as a program manager. And once you provide this information, they abide by it, and they will work really hard to stay within the budgets. But again, these numbers tell a story, and you have to be able to review these things. But putting this to begin with is very important, so you kind of know what your payroll allocation is. Usually when I have one of these, it changes every month. We'll switch people up. Sometimes we get new contracts, so we'll switch them up, and we'll let them know, hey, this is where you're budgeted to, these programs, but in the end, it really comes down to the amount of time and effort. You have to use common language with your staff. You have to be able to train them and not say, oh, it's based on budget. That's the problem. I just use the term time and effort. It's based on my time and effort on that program. That is how I come up with those percentages. One of these other agencies is kind of a funny story. They had 0.23% to a particular fund every week for an entire year. And, you know, people laugh when they see that, right? The auditors, it's like, come on, that's impossible. You know, it cannot happen. I mean, you can be the greatest accountant and the greatest person with management of your time. You are not going to manage your time that way. So again, it's really important that it's very honest process, and but it takes evaluating, reviewing your financials as well. Now, this also has to be part of your policies, your financial policies, where you're telling the funder, hey, based on our full-time equivalent, which is depicted by this time, we then charge the rent, the insurance, and so you have to have all of that information ready. That's why they'll question things. But when you create these policies, you also want to pigeonhole yourself either and leave some very general language where you have the option to use different methods. So just some advice there for you guys. But you gotta do a lot of training. You guys have to understand what this all means. You have to constantly train your staff. What I like to do is send staff to program meetings and make sure they provide a little bit of training here and there because, there's turnover and people are focused on their programs. So, but this is a very critical one, and I can tell you this is the one most agencies I've dealt with, they get in trouble because of the time and effort. And if you haven't yet, it's just a matter of time. So please work on this. Very important. We're going to continue on here. I mentioned that I got to work with an agency that had over 200 funds, 200 budget. And this agency, they worked on the different fiscal cycles as well. I think there were at least 5. And we were running into some issues. Some of those issues dealt with contracts that were ending and they were not going to renew, or opportunities for new contracts. Because what happens a lot of the time, development gets really excited about writing, and sometimes it has these crazy lofty goals that if you actually showed it to your program, they would be like, there's no way we were going to achieve that. And we were running into issues like that. This agency was also getting a lot of contracts, but once the start date began, it was still sitting on the table for a few months before any traction was started. That's part of the problem to have, right? Some of you guys might say. But it's very problematic because you can lose that contract if you're not using it. But there's also a concern of those contracts that were ending. We did not want to displace people. And so I was in a meeting with a gentleman, and I was describing to him some of the issues that we were dealing with. And I remember this concept in business school. There's a quality circle. And it's a concept, I'm going to go to the next slide, if you wanted to look at Wikipedia, is basically an idea that was used and really brought to our attention because of the efficiency of the manufacturing business and automobile business out in Japan, especially back in the 80s. If you were around during that time, you may remember, you never wanted to get an American car. You got Japanese cars because they worked. They weren't going to break down on you. Well, a big part was this model they had with efficiency, making sure the employees were able to deal with issues. And so I adapted that model and brought it to this one nonprofit where I decided, why don't we bring components of different departments into a group and have a facilitator, some form of accountability in it, but it's also opportunities where we can deal with some of these very issues that I addressed earlier. And it worked. It worked. I facilitated the first 6 months of it, and eventually somebody took it on. But it was amazing. We had development in that meeting. We had HR. We had facilities in some of these meetings. We had programs. We had an executive person on it, and they weren't necessarily always the facilitator. And we would address these things. What are some of the challenges? What's coming around the table? What grants are due? What are some of the needs so that development can write? And it really worked very well. No one actually liked the name Quality Circle, so I know after I had left this agency, they changed the name, but they kept the model. And I'm sharing this with you because it's very important that you are adapting to the environment you're in financially, culturally, that you're able to monitor what's happening and come up with some solutions. And in this case, it was really neat. It was just somebody reminding me of something that we had learned in business school, but adopting it for the nonprofit sector. And again, I'm sharing it with you guys because this is a forum or a place, a model that helped with the culture as well, where people weren't blaming each other when there were issues financially, or they had this place where they can have these discussions but more importantly, come up with some solutions or plans, even if it was 6 months out, 2 years out. So I wanted to share that with you, just something that's worked very well. I actually had a lender ask for my approval. They can share about some of these things that I had done at some of these agencies and some of the turnaround at some of these agencies, because I can tell you I found some agencies in some very difficult situations, highly stressful situations, but we were able to navigate our way out. And a big part was consistent communication, working on some potential solutions, and being very open and honest with our funders at those times. And something like a quality circle was, again, something that really ultimately helped us. Here's just some of the members that were part of that quality circle. We were bringing IT once in a while, especially when we had contracts that were, it was really about technology. So we would bring them into these meetings, or we would bring them into the meetings when there were issues with the technology side not being prepared on time for new employees. We were able to talk about staff that were going to be needed for contracts we were getting. That way HR wasn't being told last minute to come out with a position description. They had more than enough time because they were being brought into these meetings to think way ahead. And programmatically, they had input into some of these grants that were being written so that, you know, they were realistic goals being set. And facilities was brought in because sometimes when you're growing, several of you guys said you're in growth stage, you start dealing with these. So, well, how are we going to do this? Do we need to adopt a new maybe an open concept with our offices because we're running out of space, or do we need to invest in getting additional facilities? And so this is just some knowledge I wanted to share with you guys. I think that might have been my last slide. Yes, it is. Again, this is some of the work that I do. I enjoy it. I work remotely most of the time, but I'm also able to go to your offices as well. And if you're interested in any type of support for yourself, maybe just someone to bounce ideas off of or review some templates, I'd be more than happy to do that, or to go and provide an assessment for your agency. I can do that as well. One of the CEOs told me the reason that we're working with you is because of your background with the urban. And I appreciated that. And at the end of our time, his remark to me was, I love the way you communicate, and I love the way you work with us. And I'll be honest, I still don't know why that was potentially said to me, but all I have to tell you is working in the nonprofit sector is an honor, and being able to work with people and tie in numbers and the outcomes together and be forward-thinking is something that's just very exciting, and hopefully you guys feel that about the work that you're doing. I wanted to thank NCUIH just for giving me this opportunity to speak with you guys. I know I went through some of this very fast, but it is on video or is being recorded, so you have an opportunity to go back. But my information is here, and I'd be more than happy to help with any questions you might have. I think we're going to open it for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Louis. So much information. I know that I learned a few things about fiscally managing grants and really trying to keep things in order as you even increase in the amount of funding sources that you have at an agency. I think sometimes just putting into place some of these spreadsheets you mentioned will be helpful. I wanted to see if anyone else on the call might have any questions or comments that you'd like to share. Feel free to type that into the chat pod. I can also open the lines very quickly if anyone wants to speak. I just ask that you keep your lines muted if you are not speaking. So I'll do that very quickly.
The leader has unmuted your line.
So if there is anyone that would like to share, feel free to do so now. Your lines are open.
I see somebody
Like we have
typing on the chat.
people typing, yes. While we're waiting for those comments to come through, there's also, we would appreciate if you fill out our evaluation. As I mentioned, this is the last session in our series, so providing us with any information on your thoughts about this series, other topics we should cover. If you felt that this was helpful to your own organization, we'd love to hear those. And you'll also be redirected to that survey as we close out. So
there is a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it says, does any reporting require a CPA or other kind of licensing? So normally a CPA is, you need that when your audit is being done, and I'm talking about your annual audit and your single audit or financial audit. So that is when you do have to go through a CPA firm, which, you know, your audit committee at your agency would review and review several and hopefully get some bids. But that is when you do need a CPA. Beyond that, not really. Plus, CPAs are technically public accountants, right? So as far as the work you're doing here, a CPA can do it, but honestly, you need accountants and, importantly, people that understand the nonprofit sector. But that's the only time you truly need a CPA. Also, with your auditors, what I like to do is when I'm stuck with something that's maybe changed in an agency, I usually call my auditors, who again are CPAs, and they'll advise us, right? You're paying them a fee, quite a bit actually, to audit you. Why not use them during the year to help you, not like all the time, but with certain questions. And sometimes you can work out a deal with your auditors where you know you're going to use this particular auditing firm, but perhaps they can do some type of review, or another term is a compilation, throughout the year, so that when you actually come to audit period, it doesn't actually take very long because they've been looking at things throughout the year. So those are some opportunities for you as far as being able to work with a CPA. There are other questions. Okay, there's a question. So thank you so much for including the topic of allocating time and effort. Do you have any tips on how to transition from a single funded to multiple funding streams for a single employee? So the way I typically do this is I train the individual. Actually, you should train the agency, and hopefully I'm answering the question. The most important part in a budget, when you get a budget approved, is that position is on the approved budget with the funder, right? So let's say it's a prevention specialist. It's important that position already be on those budgets. Now, how the time allocation works out, the budget is going to include that, but in the end, it's really going to come down to when the employee is doing the work and how they allocate the time. So let's say you're using ADP. Normally, what I would do is retrain them. Hey, throughout the day, just know what programs you're going to be serving, and just kind of jot your time down and then enter it at the end of the day. It's a lot easier to do that. You kind of run into these types of issues with mileage, for example, mileage reimbursements, when people wait all the way to the end of the month and they have a hard time submitting it, but that's because they're not really working on it daily or as they're performing the work. So with time allocation, it really is about training and helping them understand the reasons for the multiple funding streams and how that works for them. And once you explain that to them, they generally do understand. But you have to give them the tools, too, on how to do that. And that's what I mean by, if you're using ADP or Paychex or whoever it is, they can log online right away and input their time and allocate to the correct funds. And that's something that should already be in the system. So it's a tool that you need to be able to provide to your staff. Okay, there was actually another part to that same question. Could you share any experiences regarding the challenges of managing employees who may be weak in the area of tracking their time? Yes. This is where you actually have to take it to, this is where a supervisor is really important, that the supervisor understands the importance of this and the impact of it, and therefore that supervisor should then be assisting the employee or their subordinate with the time tracking. And, you know, I mean, like, hey, let's work on it today. At the end of the day, let's talk about how your time went. And it really starts with that. But it's also explaining to them the reasons why, that there's funding implications, there are budgetary implications in this, and making sure that it's being done accurate so that when we renew the new year, we know the exact time we need to allocate for the various positions. And, you know, we have to be able to explain the bigger picture as well. And they have a big part in that. But I always start with again, supervisors, making sure they're trained well enough to be able to support that employee that may be weak in this area. And again, if the tracking of time is not done right, there's compliance issues and that end up ensuing, and they do happen. Like I said, they, without fail, they happen, and the auditor will catch those things very easy. Those are the first things I'm able to catch as well. Any other questions? That was through the chat.
The lines are unmuted if you would like to also ask a question. So I'd like to thank you once again, Liz, for your time and your effort and for sharing some of your knowledge with us on this topic about fiscally managing grants, and I guess also about fiscally managing organizations in general. We will provide this recording to those that have attended. So you'll be able to download that information. And I believe there might have been a file share for the PowerPoint presentation, but we'll provide that to you in a follow-up email if you weren't able to download that before leaving this platform. So once again, thank you. And I just wish everyone a great rest of your day. We would appreciate if you take the survey, and we'll be in touch soon with any future opportunities and trainings that NCUIH will provide. Thank you all again.